Hello students. Let's look at some other stuff that we can do with strings. For example, in order to get our list again, I could actually do this. I could even do this because str is a string, so it would know what I wanted if I asked for either one. It doesn't matter. They'll both give me the same result. And I'm looking at this, and the very first thing I see is that we can add. And it looks like, can we multiply too? Sure, we can multiply. So let's see how addition and multiplication would work with strings. So suppose I wanted to add, some strings, have one with just a space and one with algebra. So it basically takes each of those individual strings and puts them together into one larger string. Okay, that's great. I can multiply as well, so let's try and multiply two strings. And if I try and multiply two strings, Python will give me a very clear message. It's going to tell me, hey, one of those is not an integer, so this is not good. So okay, let's try this with an integer. So let's try, 4 times b. I get b, 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 or a times 4. It doesn't matter whether I put the integer on the right or the left. Also, it doesn't have to be a single character. So what is it doing? What it's doing is it's creating whatever integer you give it n, it creates n copies of the string, and then it concatenates those copies all together. So math times 5 gives me math, 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 math. Lots of math. Okay, so we can sum strings through the looking glass. But if I want spaces, I have to, remember that. I don't like that that's capped. That disturbs me. Okay, there we go. Now, to go a little further, since we can sum strings, you might say, hey, we could probably use the sum function on strings as well. And, well, there's something to that. When using the sum function on strings and lists, let's see what happens. Let's experiment, and hopefully it won't destroy my computer. It's not going to destroy our computers if we do something weird, like create a cell I can't type in. Okay, so let's try to sum. Let's go back to lists. Let's say I want to sum this for I in range 3. So I want to get the string 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And it doesn't give it to me. And then, I get worried. I say, hey, wait a second. If I do it like this, it's going to give me 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So what went wrong? I'm going to look at this and it says, hey, unsupported type for int and list. Well, let's actually get some help on the sum function. Why am I getting an unsupported type for int and list? There is no integer that I'm adding. I'm adding 1, 2, 1, 2, and 1, 2. So I might first look at this message and think, oh, Python just went a little crazy, but it didn't. Actually, it's telling us something very specific. When I do this, it is trying to add an integer to a list, which obviously is not allowed. If I were to try this, it's going to give me an error. However, I can add this, because now I'm adding a list and a list. Okay, but let's try to solve this mystery. So Python thinks I'm doing something like this. It thinks that I'm trying to add an integer to a list. It allows list to list. It doesn't allow integer to list. When I do this, even though I don't see any integer here, it seems to think that I'm trying to add an integer to a list. So let's look at this. And now I'm reading this, and hey, what it's doing when it's computing a sum is it's starting with a start value. And the default start value is 0. So we start with 0, and then it starts adding the things to 0. So that's why when I type this, we started with 0, and then it tried to add the list 1, 2 to 0, which is not allowed. So that's why we got this error. It's now clear why it thought we were trying to add an integer. By the way, this works perfectly when it comes to numbers. because exactly what we would want, 3 plus 3 plus 3, is also the same as 0 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3, so it's fine to start with 0. Okay, but let's go back and let's go into here again. It's telling me that I can change the start value. So let me try to change the start value and do the same thing. So let's try to sum this list for I in range 3. So now I have this generator here, generator expression. I want to emphasize that that's separate from what I have here. And I want to start with an empty list. So I could do that, and that's going to work. Or, of course, I could get the empty list like that. So Python's been helping me figure out how I should be using its function with all of these nice error messages that it's giving me that are telling me what's going wrong, and also the help function. So now let's jump to strings, which is what we were working with, right? Let's try to do this with strings. So let's try to sum just, well, let's start with A for I in range 3. Let's see what happens. And no, the starting value is 0. It tried to add 0 plus A, which is not going to work. Obviously, I could do this. That's going to work because now they're both strings. Okay, so you say, let's use that trick with start again. So let's try and do this. And let's let our start be an empty string. And let's see if this works. I put an extra bracket in there, which it told me right away. Okay, so now I'm getting this message. And, I might get frustrated. Oh, so many error messages. But let's read them. This is telling me something very clearly. It's telling me, hey, we're not going to let you use sum to sum strings because we have some other way to sum strings. And it's join. So, and it's telling me start with an empty string and let's use this join method instead. So let's try that. I don't even know what join is. Well, I actually do. But even if I didn't know what join was, I could try this. And let's see, okay, so that joined A to an empty string. Now let me try it with what I wanted, A for I in range 3, and that works perfectly. So here, it gave me another way to do it. It told me, I don't want you to do it this way. For strings, we have another way to do things. Now, what is this join for? And what if I don't start with an empty string? Well, what join does is it takes the things that you give it here and it separates them with the strings that you give it here, and then it puts them all together. So for instance, if I wanted to say, have a space there, and I wanted to join the list Alice in Wonderland, it will now put a space between each of these things while it puts it together. So when I'm doing a join on an empty string, that means I don't put anything in between. But if I were to do this, I would have a space in between my A's, or I could even do something, I don't know, I could use another string. And then I get a matha out of that. So that tells you a little bit about how to use join.